Hi and welcome back to Fantasy Insider, where today we're going to talk a bit about the NRL Grand Final. We have a special guest with us today, Ritchie, a good friend of mine and another DFS player, mainly focusing, I think it's fair to say, on the NRL side rather than the AFL.
Hi guys, yep, I've been around the NRL fantasy traps for quite a while now before the DFS stuff started to kick off and just continued to be involved since then, so...
He's very proud of his Fox Sports EPL position at the moment.
Number one.
And we'll get back onto soccer in a few weeks' time. But for now, I think we're just going to have a quick chat around the NRL Grand Final, so Melbourne v Cronulla. What's your thoughts to that game, Richie?
I think it'll be a very tight game, close forward. I expect Melbourne to come out on top. I think they've just got a lot of guys there that have been around the block for a while and know how to get things done in the big games. So, as much as I'd love an upset, I think the Storm will come out on top.
It doesn't look like there's much weather or anything around for the weekend, so are you expecting it to be a fairly low-scoring game, or do you think they'll get some tries?
Obviously, the weather, if there's no weather around, it'll help keep an open game, but I just think a grand final, they're usually quite tight affairs as it is, and I think the way the Melbourne side's set up, they're quite disciplined and they really grind the opposition out, so I expect it to be a low-scoring game and a really intense forward battle, and I think whoever wins that will come out on top.
So when it comes to the draft stars and Moneyball contest, do you think the forwards are going to be where you're going to be spending most of your salary cap?
I think so, especially in the draft stars competition. I see myself loading up on Melbourne's forward assets. I don't see myself picking a team without Cameron Smith, Tohu Harris and Jesse Bromwich. I think they're just going to be almost essential this week with the amount of work they get through when Craig Bellamy goes to his big plays in big games.
So one ploy I really like at draft stars is to play Tohu Harris in the halves. I mean, he's eligible there at second row forward and half. Do you think there's enough players at forward that make that a viable strategy this weekend, or will you want to pick one of the other halves?
No, I think so. I think Tohu Harris is always a good bet in the halves. Generally, what you get for value for money is you can get more points out of a cheaper player in the forwards, and I think this game's the same when you've got the likes of Kenny Bromwich and Matt Pryor running around, so I'd be looking at doing a similar strategy myself, I think.
Yeah. The other options I think at halves are like Cooper Cronk, and I forget the other option. James Maloney, yeah. And do you think, is there an argument that you're missing out potentially, say with James Maloney, on the points scored from the kicking side of the game, particularly if, for example, you were stacking a team of many Cronulla players together?
I think so. I think if you're going to go on the approach that you want Cronulla, you think Cronulla's going to have a good win in this grand final, then you'd really need to get one of the Cronulla halves into your side. I think that just comes down to what you think, and if you think that's going to be the case, it's probably going to be a good differential this week. But in saying that, based on previous Melbourne results and previous Melbourne Grand Finals, I think it'll be quite a low-scoring affair. So even if the Sharks get up, I think it'll be their forward assets that give them there, not their halves.
Yeah. I think it's interesting times to perhaps talk a bit about sort of entry strategy. I mean, with both the NRL and the AFL Grand Final, prize money is up this weekend, which means that both the number of entries is up and also the entry cap, I think, at draft stars is up this week. So there will be people who have already put in 5-6 lineups, and there'll probably be people who end up with 10 lineups in the contest. I might not have 10, but I have a few. Do you think, how would you go about sort of, if you had 6 lineups, for example, would you be splitting them across potential outcomes, or do you really think that you just go with different combinations of the forwards?
Look, if I have 6 lineups, I'm probably going to pick 1 or 2 that are a little bit more Cronulla central, but I think at least 4 of those sides are going to be based on different combinations of the forwards, looking just to play around with getting Bromwich, Harris, Gallen, Fafita in those sides, possibly the odd one with Kevin Proctor, knowing he can score a try, and just see what happens from there, playing around with lineups.
So what do you think the value players are? I mean, Feki, I think, is a really cheap back, but do you think he's a good value option, or do you think he's just cheap because he's not going to score?
I think potential to score tries always there, like any player, but I think if I was looking for a value outside back, the man I'd be looking to more is Chase Blair. Probably a little bit more expensive, but just the fact he plays in the centres is probably going to have to get through a little bit more defensive work, so his base stats are going to be up there without relying solely on scoring tries, so maybe he's a safer bet if you're looking for a cheap option in the backs.
What about Vunivalu?
Oh, you can't discount him, can you? Try scoring machine. Cooper Cronk on the end of Cooper Cronk kicks, always dangerous. Look, I think the way the sides are set up with the value of players, you're going to be looking for someone around that price in the outside backs, and he's probably one of the first people you're going to be looking to.
Yeah. So, I mean, a couple of other things we can quickly touch on. The the contest for this weekend, I guess Moneyball have a 15k in the NRL, Draft Stars have a 10k NRL and a 10k Turbo, I think. The Turbo format's weird, but we'll maybe talk about that in a bit. On the AFL side, though, of course, you've got a $50,000 prize for the AFL and a $100,000 free roll. What are your thoughts on that? Do you think there's just not enough people interested in NRL fantasy?
I think, judging by what I've seen, I think the AFL fantasy seems to be more popular. I don't know if it's the interest side or the fact that maybe more NRL fans aren't aware that they're out there, but I think it does come down to, like all things, it's a popularity contest, and because AFL's got more players, that's naturally where the bigger prize money is going to be.
Do you think that the NRL fantasy market's been growing over the last few years, or do you think it's kind of stagnated and people have moved on to other interests? And do you think there's a big crossover between the two, I guess?
It's a hard one to know if there's crossover. I think it really comes down to the individual. Like, I know myself, I'm predominantly an NRL fan, grew up watching NRL in the heartland of rugby league and didn't have too much to do with AFL, so I find it hard to make myself put AFL teams in just on the basis of I don't have a great deal of knowledge in that regard, and I think that might be relevant for fans going the other way as well. I think there's definitely more of a chance for crossover though, especially when these big money contests are out there. Like, so all your NRL fans, you've got 50 grand in the AFL, it might be worth just sticking in a team and see what happens.
So we expect you to have a couple of teams in the AFL 50k?
Oh, I'll just use all my budget.
Okay, so I think we'll just quickly sort of touch on the Turbo contest with Draft Stars. So they've got a $10,000 Turbo, which is basically the same prize money as their main contest. And what are your general thoughts on Turbos generally and this week's?
Turbos, always interesting, always a bit harder to get that number one side in, just because all the guns are in that first bracket. Look, the thing that took my eye really was in the last category. You had Matt Pryor, could be good value, but then again you've got Ben Barber in there as well, so that could be a tough one. Might be a good one for lineup cruncher, I think.
Yeah, it could well be. I think the other thing with Turbos, I noticed last week that some of the names at the top of the leaderboard, particularly in the big prize money ones, were names that I no longer recognise, whereas previously there had been fairly consistent names around the top of the leaderboard. And I think that when you've just got the one game and when you've got such tight groupings as you were talking about, it's a lot harder to perhaps get that optimal lineup, and even with a multi-entry strategy it's a lot harder to cover all of the outcomes.
Yes, I agree.
Yeah. I think maybe the other thing that's worth briefly touching on with the Turbos is, and to some extent the general tournaments as well, is just the idea that you have to sort of sell a narrative, right? There needs to be some logical connection as to why these group of players are going to do better. And do you think there's any kind of centre wing pairings or anything like that you'd be interested in both the Turbos and generally?
Well, it's a kind of a hard one because you go to Vunivalu in the Melbourne side and a lot of his tries have come from kicks this year, which basically cuts out the centre. But then again, it's a big game. He hasn't performed too well this year, but maybe it's Will Chambers' time to come of age a little bit more again and get a few points on the board. They could see some good results.
Yeah, and maybe one of those lineups that's suitably unique that you get that you're different from everyone else.
Yes, exactly. Especially given the way the players are grouped, I think that could work out well.
And I think that comes a bit to my personal strategy. I think for this weekend that there's just so many more entries in a $50,000 or a $20,000 tournament than there are normally, that you really do need to be unique in some way. One question we often get with the lineup cruncher is, doesn't everyone just have the same lineup? And yes, if you just click the generate lineups button, you'll get the same lineup. But we always tell people that you need to sort of combine the lineup cruncher with your own research, and you need to do something to make that lineup different and stand out from everyone else's. I think this weekend what I'm probably going to end up doing is putting in a whole bunch of lineups, trying to get a couple of unique combinations. And I think unique combinations, particularly in a grand final week where you've got big tournaments, lots of entries, having somebody unique is going to be important. Do you think there's any players that perhaps stand out to you that maybe might get some extra minutes or might score well whilst being low owned?
I think a real value option this week might be one of the Melbourne interchange forwards, and the bloke I'm looking straight at is Cammy Bromwich. I just reckon he has a lot of impact to that side when he comes on the field and really can bust a tackle. And especially if you're trying to play Tohu Harris in the halves as well, you're going to have that extra forward spot, and he might be the perfect man to slot in.
Okay, that sounds like an interesting one. Probably find that in a couple of my lineups.
Yeah, don't doubt it.
We also talked about that a bit on our blog, our DFS 101 article last week, where we talked a bit about contrarian strategies. And that's kind of another way to go around getting unique players, looking at combinations that the bookmakers don't like and that then may be low owned, and putting those in your lineups. And yeah, it's going to be an interesting week. Any final thoughts on the grand finals?
No, it's going to be a tough week. My strategy really is that your top Melbourne Storm assets are going to deliver you points this week, so I know personally in my teams I'll be loading up on them. One final word from my other NRL tragics out there: don't be afraid to have a go at the AFL games with all the money that's on offer this week. You never know what's going to happen, especially when there's so many people entering contests, so who knows. If you need any help, check out Fantasy Insider. They'll give you some good tips.
Yeah, appreciate the plug. We're going to get you to watch the grand final, AFL Grand Final?
Yeah, I will actually. That's my one AFL game a year I watch.
Thanks Ritchie for joining us. We hope you got some good information out of this, and good luck with your entries this weekend, wherever you're playing, whatever contest you're entering. And we'll see you on the leaderboards.